London is not just some city. Its spirit stands outside of time. Certain places have influenced its citizens. It is not only a setting, but a presence, a character in various films, novels, and poems. My name is Philip Röttgers, and I search for London's spirit. I think there are two particular ways to explore the powerful and mysterious place that is London: through literature and through walking. Follow me into a secret world. Follow me to London beyond time and place. In this series, I will explore its spirit by walking the city and talking to London enthusiasts. I invite you to join me. Together, we will discover London beyond time and place. This is Talks Beyond Time and Place. Hello everybody to Talks Beyond Time and Place. My name is Philip Röttgers and my guest today is Jack Chesher of Living London History. Welcome, Jack.
Hello.
Jack is a lover of all things London, history and walking, and on his website Living London History, he wants to uncover the history of London and help Londoners see their home in a different light, as well as helping visitors to get under the skin of this incredible city. So I thought maybe we can start with you, Jack, telling us a bit about you and about Living London History.
Yeah, no problem. So I grew up in Essex, actually, so obviously relatively near to London. London was always kind of the place that we'd go on sort of day trips and, you know, go to the theatre and museums and that kind of thing. So yeah, I grew up in Essex, then spent 7 years in Bristol. So I studied history at the University of Bristol and stuck around for a few more years, basically. So stuck around for 4 more years whilst working, essentially. And then, so that was up until December 2019, when I left my job. I went traveling for a few months. Obviously, lockdown happened last year in March. Pretty much when I got back from traveling, actually. Okay. I got back on the 19th of March and we went back, we went into lockdown on the 23rd. So
1 year ago, it's basically 1 year
yeah,
ago.
Well, yeah, exactly. Yeah. Crazy, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I moved to London properly in August of last year. So I got a job here in June, moved here in August, and I set up Living London History, the blog, in September.
Okay.
Yeah. I'd been back. My partner had been living in London and had lived here for a few years. So I'd been backwards and forwards to London a lot and had spent a lot of time in London, but wasn't actually living there officially.
Yeah.
So the blog was something that I'd kind of been thinking about for a little while. And obviously with sort of these ideas and things like that, sometimes they take a bit of time to get them off the ground or actually find the impetus to actually do it.
Right.
But actually, I think probably lockdown helped with that. I don't want to mention lockdown too much, but
it's okay. We all know, or we all have to deal with lockdowns. So and sometimes it helps people. Sometimes it open up opportunities. So it's okay.
I mean, I don't know whether I think I probably would have done the blog if it hadn't been for lockdown. But obviously, the limiting of activities, I was getting out and about, walking a lot in the city. I wanted sort of a project. Obviously, I'd always loved history. I studied history. I love walking around cities. Whenever I sort of go away to other cities abroad, I always try and sort of go on a walking tour and that kind of thing.
Yeah,
so yeah, I set up the blog in September. It's essentially a weekly blog post where I look at sort of a quirky hidden gem in London, or I do quite a few sort of self-guided walks. So when it's probably a couple of years ago actually, and probably one of the things that inspired me to do the blog was I read the biography of Samuel Pepys, the Claire Tomalin biography. I don't know whether you know it. Really enjoyed the book. And then when I was in London, I sort of took myself on a bit of a self-guided, made up Samuel Pepys tour of London, which actually now I have written as an official tour and put onto my blog.
Yes, I've seen that.
And yeah, and it was that kind of, and I thought it would be a good idea to have a blog or a website where there are sort of multiple historical walks by sort of theme or by area that you can sort of scroll through and sort of pick one out. And if you're visiting London or if you live in London. So that's how the blog was started, really.
Yeah, and I think it's a great idea, and it I think it also developed greatly, and I think you have quite a lot of readers and followers, at least from what I saw. So you really seem to have hit something with the blog and the idea. But I like I know exactly what you mean when you say you read a book, in your case, of Samuel Pepys, and then you thought, I'm gonna walk where he walked, or where he lived, or whatever. I know exactly what you mean, because I also like doing these things. And I also like, anytime I go to another city or another place, I like to walk around, just experience the place by walking, because this is basically, for me, I think this is the best way to experience a city or a place. And so I really understand your approach and the idea behind it. So you said you study history. Have you always been kind of fascinated with London history, or where did that come from?
I've always been fascinated with history. I've always read a lot of history books. I've always been very interested in sort of British history, kind of interested in your own country's history, as you are. But I wouldn't necessarily say until I moved here I had a specific fascination for London's history. Obviously, I was interested in it in the sense of, in a broader sense, as I say, in terms of like British history and how it all sort of fits together and that kind of thing. But in terms of looking at London as a city, I would say that properly started when I moved to London and started walking around and realized just how much there was to sort of discover, basically, in London.
Right. Yeah. And there's loads to discover. There's lots to discover, as one can also see on your website. So what was the most surprising story or fact that you've come across so far?
Maybe not the most surprising, but sort of the thing that I found most interesting was, I'd actually been on again, this was probably maybe 3 or 4 years ago. I went on the backstage tour at the Globe.
Oh yeah.
Which is a really, really, really interesting tour. And at that point, as I say, probably didn't know much about specifically London history at all. And in the sort of museum section, I can't remember whether they actually mentioned it in the tour, but they've got like a little museum display section, and it was talking about the frost fairs on the Thames, essentially great big carnivals and fairs that happened when the Thames used to freeze over, which obviously doesn't happen anymore. I think the last one, or not properly anyway, not enough to have a fair.
That would be an experience nowadays.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And they were up until the I think it was when London Bridge, the old London Bridge, was demolished. I think it was 1833. These frost fairs would happen, not very regularly, I don't think. I think there were say 20 over the course of about 400 years or something like that.
Yeah.
But I remember that fact specifically. I remember learning that fact, and it just really, really interested me. Not something I'd ever heard before.
Yeah.
It's kind of pretty much lost bit of history as well. You can't see the evidence around you, but
right. Yeah. And I think it's also so interesting, because you often think, I'm not very too familiar with the topic also, but I often think, have there been any accidents? Have the ice, maybe the ice broke up?
I'm pretty sure there were. I think I've read about or heard that there were a fair few occasions when the ice would crack and loads of people would fall in.
Yeah.
Basically.
Great. Yeah.
I don't think that stopped them.
Yeah, obviously not, evidently not, but yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, would be interesting to witness an event like this nowadays, but won't probably happen.
I mean,
So how
I
do
think
you,
go on.
No, please, if you wanted to say something.
But I was just gonna say, I know at some points they would literally be roasting hogs on the ice.
Yeah.
Like, whole pigs, and actually have fires on the ice, which
Yeah.
is quite astonishing.
Yeah, yeah. Just yeah. I mean, if you want the full event, then these things have to be included.
Food and alcohol,
Right.
usually.
Yeah, yeah. And it helps against the cold, so yeah.
Yeah. True.
So how do you pick the topics you write about? How do you choose them?
Good question. I mean, I'm constantly on the lookout for new places to go and see and explore. Constantly sort of reading. My London sort of history library is growing all the time.
Yeah, mine too.
Yeah. And obviously on social media, similar accounts and things like that. I keep an eye out for places that I haven't heard of or haven't been to yet. And I always pin, I've got a Google Maps, like a My Maps on Google. And every time I find a new place, I pin it on the map. So on a weekend, if I'm free on a Saturday or whatever, I'll just go to a particular area, and then I've got 10 places that I can go and explore that I've noted down.
Yeah.
Which works well as a technique, I think.
Yeah.
But I mean, I try, and probably the main factor in what I decide to post each week is just to have variety. So I try and sort of alternate between walks and maybe like a hidden gem type topic, and I try to vary area as much as I can as well. So I don't want to be, I live in North London and I work in kind of central South London, just south of the river. So those are the places I obviously spend the most time, and I probably have the most content on.
Yeah.
But I do try and make sure I get sort of to other places and feed them into it as well. Otherwise it's, you know, too specific to the areas that I'm in most of the time.
Yeah, right. Yeah, but you have so much to choose from, so it won't be difficult to find.
I mean, I haven't really got east much. I need to try and I really want to go to sort of explore more sort of Bethnal Green and Whitechapel and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But obviously with the current situation, you can't go too far. I need to be able to walk there essentially.
Right. Yeah, that's the thing.
Which limits me. But I'm lucky in the sense that I work in central London. That has really helped. If I didn't have that, then there would be a lot of North London on the blog for the past 6 months.
Which would also be fine, but yeah, of course I understand what you mean. So yeah, but once it is possible, I mean, I'm a huge, the area, you know, East London, Bethnal Green, Whitechapel, Spitalfields, that's the area where I don't know why, but I feel most drawn to. This is where I often think, if there's an area where I feel home, this is it, and I don't know why. I often wonder why that is, because it's just a feeling. So that's kind of interesting.
I do know what you mean. I probably Spitalfields, out of all those areas, the place I've been to a couple of times and explored most fully so far, and it has that. I feel like it has a more sort of natural friendliness to it. I think sometimes in the sort of posher areas, basically sort of West London, Kensington, places like that, it almost feels a bit inaccessible sometimes.
Yeah.
You walk across these places, like, who lives in these houses? Because you know, how do you get to that point?
Right. Definitely. Yeah, absolutely. But that's interesting, because I once I walked with a friend through Notting Hill, and she said, "Oh, it's so lovely here." I mean, not a couple of years ago, Notting Hill was a terrible place, but nowadays it's quite posh also, and pretty and hip.
And she said, oh, it's so beautiful. I could live here. And I thought, yeah, it's nice, but I don't feel anything here. You know, sometimes it's just what you feel, how you feel connected to a place, and sometimes you don't, which I think is interesting, because you can't really explain why, but maybe it's even better if you can't explain why.
Yeah, it's just a sort of gut feeling, basically.
Right, not coming from the head, but from the gut. So, Jack, you're also here today because you did a blog and a self-guided walk also about London's Body-Snatchers. So we wanted to talk a bit about them, because we both thought it's quite an interesting topic and part of London's history. So where did the idea for the blog, the Body-Snatcher blog and the self-guided walk come from?
To be honest, I can't really remember where the sort of spark for the idea came from. I know I'd read a little bit about the topic when researching Crossbones Graveyard in Southwark, because that was a sort of key spot for or a key cemetery for body snatchers. So I'd kind of come across them through that, which was one of my earliest blogs. So that was kind of in the back of my mind as a topic to cover at some point. I'm also on Facebook, you know, you've got these sort of like London history groups, and there's a group called London Sinister. I don't know whether Sinister London.
I'm also part of the group. Yeah.
So I'd been a member of that group. I saw sort of things people were posting. I thought it'd be good, and something I hadn't done on the blog previously, to do a walk or do a blog post on sort of the more sinister side of London, the darker side of London. Obviously people love that as well, so I thought it'd be a popular blog post. So that's kind of where it came from, really. And then when I started sort of looking into it, obviously some topics just either don't work or are very difficult to work into a walk. So obviously I had to kind of look into it to make sure that I could put together a walk that kind of made sense as well. Yeah,
and it does. So I wanted to ask how you kind of develop the route. I mean, some points are fixed. You have to include them if you're doing a body snatcher walk, but I think you start in Bunhill Fields, right? In the cemetery in Bunhill Fields.
Yeah, the things that I kind of took into it. So I did all the sort of reading and research, I'd say, probably first, and kind of got down everything that I wanted to put in it information wise. As I was doing the research, I again sort of plotted all the points that are relevant to London today, or places that you can still go to, on a map, and just looked at it on a map basically, and thought what would be the best route. I mean, this walk actually is probably the trickiest one I've written, I'd say, in terms of finding a route and then writing it and introducing a sort of narrative almost into the walk that made sense, but also made sense to the actual geography and the things around you. So I decided to start it in Bunhill Fields, which is again one of the sort of places that's mentioned quite a lot when it comes to the sort of body snatcher gangs of London, early 19th century, one of the hotspots for it, really. And I thought it'd be a good place to start because obviously it's quite sort of atmospheric. It kind of gets you in the mood for the walk to look at that darker side of London. Yeah, right. Yeah, and then I think you then go towards Smithfield, obviously, and then St. Bart's Hospital, the fixed points basically that are part of the body snatcher history, body snatching history. Yeah, exactly. I wanted to include, obviously, there obviously had to be a burial ground or a cemetery in there somewhere, and then there's as you say, the taverns and the inns that these body snatcher gangs would kind of do their networking, if you like, and even some of them display the bodies and sell them to the doctors in the hospitals. So I really wanted to get some of them in. Obviously wanted to get the hospitals in. They're kind of key to the story. Sure. So that's kind of how it all came together, anyway.
I think there one or two of these inns and taverns, they still exist, like the Rising Sun Tavern. Have you been to one of the existing ones?
So the Rising Sun is the only one on the tour that on the walk that is still there. So the Fortune of War Tavern, which is one that's most closely linked to the London Burkers, isn't there anymore. So it's just a corner, and there's sort of a plaque which explains about it, basically. I think it was demolished in early 20th century, something like that. But yeah, I haven't been to the Rising Sun, so I've got a very long mental list of places that I want to go and go to after lockdown, and the majority of those are like historical pubs, basically. So I've got a lot of drinking to do.
Yeah, but same for me. I know exactly what you mean. I have to visit this pub because it has a historical connection to whatever, and I can have a pint, you know. So I sometimes obviously post on Instagram or whatever about these pubs that have a really interesting history and backstory. I really want to go to them, and people often ask as well, will post and comment, say, "Oh, have you been?" Or they'll say they've been, and I have to comment back and say, you know, I actually haven't been. I really want to go, and I've got to but hopefully it's soon you can go there, or hopefully,
fingers crossed.
But I think the Fortune of War, there was somewhere near what's it called, where the gold Pie Corner, right?
Pie Corner, that's where the pub used to be, on Pie Corner.
Right.
And so you've got the plaque explaining about the pub, and then above that you've got the little golden boy. Right.
Yes. So as you said, it's quite an interesting story, and I think of course body snatching was kind of an interesting, you know, important business in Victorian Britain, especially in London. I mean, there's also the famous story of Burke and Hare in Edinburgh. But so maybe if you can't answer that, can you tell us a bit why it was such a successful business, body snatching, or how it worked, basically?
I think basically body snatching as a thing, so stealing dead bodies, either digging them up or somehow managing to steal them from the families, had been around for forever, pretty much. Selling them for whatever use a human body could have, but it really sort of came into its own in the early 19th century. So it's actually sort of the period where it, as I say, came into its own in the big cities like Edinburgh and London, is the late Georgian period, 1800s, 1820s, 1830s. And the main sort of factors for that really was these blossoming medical schools in London and Edinburgh. So you had St Guy's, St Thomas's, King's in sort of the later 1829, I think King's opened. Lots of new sort of medical students. It was all becoming a bit more official, the medical profession. And obviously to study anatomy and study medicine, they needed bodies to dissect. And up until 1832, the only bodies that could be used were those of criminals who had been executed. So with the increase in the number of bodies that were needed and the decreasing numbers of exexecutions, obviously opened up an opportunity for people. So yeah, that's the main sort of factor, really. It was also sort of a period of great change in England. So the Napoleonic Wars had come to an end. There was a great sort of population increase. There was a lot of immigration from the continent into London, but also from the countryside as well. Lots of people were moving from the countryside into the cities for a number of reasons. So there was a lot of people, basically, There were a lot of bodies. I think, if my facts are correct, in sort of beginning of the 19th century, 1800, 1801, London had a population of about 1 million.
Yeah, I think you're
and
right.
Then by 1831, it had a population of about 1.65 million, which is obviously a pretty percentage increase in the number of people that are around. So the number of people dying and the number of bodies was obviously a factor in it as well. And kind of the number of people who people wouldn't necessarily miss going missing. There was a big sort of issue with vagrancy and homelessness and that kind of thing, and these were obviously prime targets for the body snatchers to prey on, in terms of people dying and stealing their corpses, but also, which is what happened with the London Burkers and Birkenhair in Edinburgh. They started supplementing their supply by murdering people, basically.
Yeah. And I think this was, I mean, there was also the problem that they didn't know. I mean, in general, when London became so, when its population grew so much, they didn't really know where to bury all the bodies. Later on, they had the Magnificent Seven. Magnificent Seven cemeteries, but back then it was like, we'll just put one body on the other until there's no more.
Particularly obviously if you were poorer, you couldn't afford a proper grave, you were buried in a shallow grave, which makes it much easier for your body to be stolen.
Right. Yeah. And I think it wasn't illegal, right? I think body snatching was not illegal in no way. Yeah.
No, so it wasn't officially illegal. It was sort of illicit, would be the term. So it was frowned upon. Maybe frowned upon is a bit of a kind way of putting it. It was thought of very badly within society, and people did sometimes serve short sort of prison sentences, but it wasn't there wasn't a law against it, because a dead body wasn't considered anyone's property, so you can't steal.
Yeah, right. But I think this is quite interesting. And you also mentioned already the London Burkers, and I think there was also the Borough Gang. I think they were also quite famous. So can you tell us a bit about the different gangs in London, the resurrectionists? Sorry.
As you say, the two that I mentioned in the walk, there sort of seems to be the most information about, and the most primary sources on, basically, are the Borough Gang. So they were, I think they're basically considered the first sort of professional gang of body snatchers in London. So they worked for, as the name suggests, they operated out of South London predominantly, but they were all over. So they were a gang of, at their peak, they were a gang of 6 people led by a man called Ben Crouch, I believe, who used to be a porter at St. Guy's. So often with these body snatchers and body snatcher gangs, they'd often worked in the hospitals as porters or servants in the dissecting rooms, or they'd worked in graveyards actually as grave diggers. Was often the case. They kind of had expertise in the skills needed to be a body snatcher, and they had the contacts as well. So the Borough Gang were one of the main gangs used by these hospitals. The doctors were all complicit in it. There was a guy called top surgeon at the time called Sir Astley Cooper, who essentially employed the Borough Gang to get bodies for him. It's thought that they sold over 1,500 bodies over the course of sort of 10-15 years. So so that's the Borough Gang.
Were they the ones with the diary? I think there's also this diary where they, or what was that? Another gang?
So that is the Borough Gang. It's a guy called Joseph Naples who kept, it's an amazing source, actually. It's so read, because you get such an insight into their lives, and it makes it very sort of real. You're reading this, and he's going on about, we couldn't go out tonight because you know, Tom got drunk.
Yeah.
Sort of 3 nights in a row where where they got too drunk.
Still drunk again. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, this is
really interesting.
Yeah.
Really, but yeah, he kept a diary for a couple of years. I think 1801 to 1802. And yeah, it's an amazing source for studying body snatching, basically.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and there was the other famous gang that you already mentioned, the London Burkers.
Yes, the London Burkers. So they were a little bit operating, I think, a little bit later on towards the end. Basically, it was kind of their arrest for what they were doing that facilitated the public outcry against body snatching, which then led to the Anatomy Act of 1832, which meant that bodies that had been donated could be used for dissection. So that pretty much, I think, wiped out the body snatching trade, because they could come by bodies a lot, the doctors could come by bodies a lot more easily. So the London Burkers were a pair really, but there were a couple of other sort of satellite people who worked with them, and whether they modeled themselves on Burke and Hare or whether they sort of essentially had the same idea is we're not sure, basically. But yeah, so they decided that they would start murdering people, finding people in the pubs. So that's where the sort of taverns come into the walk, because obviously they're a great place to find people unawares. Maybe they could drug them in the pub. There is evidence of them doing that. They often took them back to their house in where was it? It was sort of Columbia Market sort of area.
Yeah, I think it was Bethnal Green, right? So
it was Bethnal Green, yeah. Nova Scotia Gardens, I think they're.
Yeah.
I say take them back there and kill them, basically, and then sell their bodies.
Yeah.
They need some efforts to make it look like these people have been dug up, so they'd sort of smear mud on them and that kind of thing. But I think there must have been some sort of, there must be, people knew it was going on. I think that's my opinion on it anyway. I think they must have known it was going on. The amount of sort of bodies that were coming in and that kind of thing, I think everyone was just sort of complicit, and it sort of reached ahead, particularly with the Burke and Hare murders, rather than it's suddenly, you know, becoming an issue that people have suddenly realized is happening. Yeah,
right. Yeah, I think the basically the final thing was the Italian boy, right? Where they murdered the Italian boy. That's what the name of the case, basically, because they murdered this boy, and I think they hung him upside down in a well. That's what they did with their victims.
They drowned him in a well. Yeah, he was essentially he was a 14-year-old Italian immigrant. He was selling white mice, I think, or that's what he was doing before. He was selling white mice on the street. There's quite a big Italian community in London, sort of Clerkenwell, Smithfield area. And these sort of young children were obviously prime targets. They often didn't have sort of parents there and that kind of thing, so they went missing. You know, who's going to notice? But obviously people did notice. They took the body to, it was a doctor at King's actually, who was basically suspicious that this body hadn't been dug up. The signs were pretty obvious. As I say, there was a bit of mud smeared on the legs, but as he was a doctor, he could work out that this person had been bludgeoned on the head, and you know, the clues started fitting together, basically, and he rang the police. Basically, he kept them in the hospital, I think. So sort of not distracted them, but kept them there long enough for the police to turn up and arrest them. Yeah,
and I think there was something with the teeth. I think they knocked out the teeth because they could sell the teeth, and that there was I don't know, there was blood in the mouth in the boy's mouth, and I think one of the others said, one of them, I think Bishop and Williams. I'm not quite sure.
Williams, May
also, right? But I think they said, "Oh, I think the blood gave us away."
Yeah.
So they realized where the mistake was. Yeah.
Yeah. Teeth actually as well was a big sort of business. So they'd often take out the teeth, as you say, to sell for dental work.
Right.
And yeah, so that was one of the clues.
Huh.
And unusual bodies as well. So people who might have deformities, they would obviously, there's a sort of medical interest there. You can learn things from them. So they would fetch a high price. Fetuses would fetch a high price, things like that. So yeah.
And I think it's also interesting, kind of ironic, that when they were sentenced to death, and afterwards their bodies were dissected. The same thing happened to them that they made their money with. So
definitely an irony there.
Yeah, right.
So actually, one of the other interesting things I read, there's a great book actually. I don't know whether you've read it, The Italian Boy, by Sarah Wise, which basically covers this case.
Yeah, of course I know the name. Yes, sure, but I haven't read it.
So it looks at the case and obviously the London Burkers in great detail, and she has a sort of intersperses chapters about London at the time. She calls it sort of the era with no name, because it's sort of between the Georgians and the Victorian. She writes quite a lot and writes really well about the sort of big changes going on in London at the time in terms of population and all the factors playing into it. That's I'd highly recommend reading that. What was I talking about before?
They were dissected also, but I think as you said, the whole area, the whole era, that's quite an appropriate name for it, the nameless era, because it was between the monarchs, and it was such an interesting era for London because of the growth of population and the sinister side. There were also the Redcliffe Highway murders in Wapping and things like that. So quite a lot happened back then. Yeah,
it's kind of like the social opinions were changing quite a lot on what acceptable and that kind of thing, and the institutions were then sort of catching up.
Right.
Very interesting.
Yeah. So I think you end the walk at St. Bride's, Fleet Street, where the iron coffin is in the crypt. So what is the connection, the coffin's connection to body snatching?
Yeah, so the iron coffin was basically one of the ways that people would stop their relatives who had died being dug up by body snatchers. So there were kind of a number of tactics. As we said earlier, it wasn't actually illegal, so people took matters into their own hands quite a lot, essentially. So they'd one of the family members would sit by the grave for the first few nights, because after a few days the body would be too putrid to sell to someone, so you'd only have to watch it for a few days and nights. But so it's still not great, but they watched it. There were watchtowers and watchmen put up in cemeteries. There were these iron coffins. I think these kind of things were more for richer people, basically, that could afford it. So the iron coffins, there's a thing called a mort safe, which was essentially an iron cage that they'd put around the coffin. That was another one of the tactics. Dogs, like guard dogs and things like that. So so that's that. That's where the walk ends.
Well, it's an appropriate end to the tour. I mean, when I look at your website, I see a lot of blogs and walks that include cemeteries. As I said, Bunhill Fields and Crossbones Cemetery and Abney Park Cemetery, St. John at Hampstead. So which London cemetery is your favorite? Do you have a favorite?
That's very difficult, because they're all good in their own ways, I think probably my favorite at the moment is Abney Park, mainly probably because I've just been there more. I live closer, and it is a fascinating cemetery. It's got a lot of non-conformists that are buried there. and it's got that sort of Gothic chapel in the middle, funerary chapel that's no longer in use. It's kind of this great sort of shell, which is really, really interesting, and lots of interesting people buried there, basically. So that's probably my favorite at the moment.
Yeah.
I mean, the sort of I do find cemeteries really interesting. I think they're a great source of sort of stories and history, and you can learn a lot from them. And they're also very nice places to just walk around, sort of peaceful places to walk. But lockdown has obviously played into cemeteries have been open, so I've been able to go to them, which is one of the reasons why behind why there's so many of them, of those posts.
I think there's also one about St. Pancras Old Church with the hardy tree, right? With the where all the graves are put around this tree. I think it's just such an interesting place. When you go there, and I mean, I knew before I went there, I knew what to expect. But if you go there and you don't know what it is, you think like, what's that? Why is that?
Very sort of eerie looking, isn't it?
Right. Yeah. And I think they also found the bones of a walrus there. I think this is
I mentioned that in my blog post on it, actually. I wrote the blog post and published it, and then I think a few days later or a week later I read about the story about the walrus. So I was like, okay, well, I've got to put that in. I updated it, but yeah, they essentially found the bones of a Pacific walrus buried with the bones of 7 people, and it's basically a mystery. No one really knows why. There are a few theories. They think it might have come from London Zoo, which is obviously nearby. There were Pacific walruses there around the right time. I think one of them died and it was dissected, again back to dissection, and so they think it might be that one, or actually body snatching is a potential theory as well as sort of the ivory trade, that kind of thing.
That's right. I think especially in connection with St. Pancras Old Church, there's also a bit of a literary connection to body snatching, because I think Dickens he used A Tale of Two Cities. I think this is in St. Pancras Old Church, where there's body snatching. And what I also find interesting is that Mary Shelley, who wrote Frankenstein, her mother was buried in St. Pancras Old Church, Mary Wollstonecraft. And you know, Frankenstein is this story where someone, you know, creates a creature from various body parts. So I think it's just interesting to see where this influence, maybe not even consciously, but where this all ended up also in literature, the old body snatching.
She spent a lot of time in St. Pancras Old Church Cemetery as well, didn't she, Mary Shelley?
The
grave of her mother quite a lot.
Right.
And as you say, it was another place where there'd be body snatchers lurking around all the time. So a very sort of sinister, dark place that's fed into her.
Right. Probably influenced the story. I think so too.
Yeah.
So which other self-guided walks have you got planned, or have you got in general that you want to share with us?
What have I got planned? Oh gosh, that's a good question. I definitely want to do some more. I haven't done any sort of area specific ones in a while. So I'd like to do, and the ones I've done, I think, have been more north focused. So I've done a Highgate one. I'd quite like to do another sort of specific area and look at all a self-guided walking tour of all the sort of hidden history and sort of quirky bits that you can get out and go and see. Other than that, as I said earlier, there are areas that I still want to explore quite a lot. So Bethnal Green and Whitechapel, sort of east, and then obviously places further out that I haven't been able to get to. So I've got a Historic Royal Palaces membership. I got it for my birthday, I think, or Christmas or something like that, and I haven't really been able to use it. I used it once when I at the Tower of London in the Gap when we were allowed to do stuff. But I really want to go to Hampton Court, do sort of Richmond and Twickenham and these sort of places as well.
Yeah, Do you have, I just thought, did you have a plan? Do you have a plan to maybe also do guided walks, and only self-guided walks, but where you lead a group of people along?
Yes, that is sort of my plan, I think. So I'm currently on the Open City Golden Key Academy course. So that's sort of a couple of evenings a month between February and September. It's the first year they're doing it, actually. So yeah, it's a course on guiding and the skills that you need to guide in sort of a general sense. And the end sort of thing of that, they help you put together your own walking tour, sort of curate the tour, and then at Open City Weekend in September, you run that tour basically to the public, and you get assessed on that.
Great.
And that's the end of the course. So I'm doing that currently, and yeah, I would love to get into guiding and start guiding. So that is sort of part of my plan, and hopefully the blog and sort of my social media accounts will be a good springboard for that.
I think so. I think this is, especially now, once again, we have to mention lockdown, but especially now, this is very helpful, because people will know, oh, this is Jack from Living London History. I've read a lot of his posts and of his blogs. I'm going to join a tour. So yeah, I think this is really, really helpful. Yeah, let me know. I'll join one of your tours if it's possible one day. I'd love to do that. Yeah.
Sounds good.
Yeah, definitely. So do you have a favorite place in London, or is it impossible to say?
Yeah, that is a really difficult question. I've been thinking about it. I'd say probably my favorite area in terms of interest currently is Smithfield, actually, and Clerkenwell. Obviously relevant to the Body-Snatching tour, because it goes through there. It's probably the area that and sort of Holborn, that sort of area I've sort of explored the most, I'd say, because where I've walked in from where I've been living in North London. Yeah. The first bit I sort of come to each time, basically. But I think it's a fascinating area. And you kind of get that sense of old London that you don't get some other places. So it's sort of little alleyways, and you've got the St Bartholomew Gatehouse. It's amazing Tudor build, been somehow magically preserved. So yeah, that area is probably at the moment the area that I find sort of most interesting. In terms of my favorite area to spend time, I love being by the river. So probably the South Bank. I used to love going to the National Theatre and the Globe and places like that, and we'll definitely be going back once they've opened. So yeah, South Bank, Southwark, Bankside, I find all that area really, really interesting, and just really a really nice place to spend time.
Yeah, it's true. I understand what you mean, and it's really vibrant also. So there's this, yeah, I understand what you mean. This is just a nice area to be, you know.
It's got a good atmosphere. Yeah,
definitely. Yeah. So I don't know if this is possible to answer, but has dealing with London and its history changed your view of this city, or maybe also walking this city? Has this changed from what you knew before, maybe before you moved there, before you started this?
It's definitely made me love London. Basically, it's probably the easiest way to sort of explain it, and it's kind of not something that I expected necessarily. I thought I'd find it interesting, and I knew I enjoyed history and walking around seeing history, and I knew I really liked London and spending time in London. But studying it and sort of feeling like you understand it and understand the sort of, or beginning to understand the sort of urban sort of geography and what you're seeing around you and how you sort of read the city and that kind of thing, it does, it's made me really love London as a city and love London as a place. You feel a lot more connected to it as a place, which actually I wasn't really expecting, because I've never really looked I mean, obviously I've lived in other places, I've never really looked so in depth at a place and explored it so thoroughly. So yeah, that's probably the main thing.
Yeah, but I understand what you mean, and sometimes I think I need to invite someone to these talks who really hates London. It would be just interesting. No, really, I mean, to talk to someone who really says, I think this is a terrible place, and then would be interesting to get his or her opinion on all these things, because most of my guests, or all of them, they've been like, yeah, I really appreciate London. I like London. I love London. It's just, but I think maybe I should invite someone who says, no, it's really terrible. that would be very interesting.
Occasionally, I'll get a comment, like a stray comment on like a social media post or something like that. Not really actually on like Instagram or Facebook. I've recently got into TikTok.
Oh yeah. I've not participated in TikTok yet, but maybe, I don't know, is it worth it? I think we're too old for that. You're maybe not.
Well, that's kind of what I thought, and I thought I'd give it a go. And actually, it's quite fun. It's a very user-friendly app in terms of putting together like the videos and stuff like that. And it's quite I mean, it's an odd one, because I've had a video, I think it was my second or third video, and it did amazing, like so much better than I thought it was going to be. It's got 450,000 views, something like that. And it just blew up, loads of comments, likes. It was amazing. And then I posted one this week and it's got 2,000, and I'm so confused why. But it's something to do with like obviously something to do with the algorithm and what time you put it, and obviously it's probably not quite as good a video, but not quite as enticing kind of thing, because your audience is so much broader, because it shows it to loads of random people essentially.
Yeah. But I think sorry.
So yeah, I mean, it was TikTok where I'll occasionally get a comment from someone saying, I hate London, London's a terrible place. I don't know why you post about it or whatever, I think, why do you hate it? I mean,
but maybe I should join TikTok then, because maybe I'll find someone there who really hates it. But I think this is also funny what you just said with the videos, because I mean, 2,000 views, this is not bad. I mean, 2,000 people watch your video, but if you compare it, in comparison, you think, what's wrong? There's so
that's very true, actually. Yeah, it's all relative.
Oh, that's funny. Yeah. Maybe TikTok. Maybe one day.
Also, you can just sort of experiment with it.
Right.
It doesn't really matter. You can just stick some things out there and see what happens. You might. Yeah. Might be brilliant.
Maybe we'll see. So my final question to all of my, or most of my guests is, but it's sometimes a bit difficult to answer. So if you can't, that's perfectly fine. Can you name 3 Londoners that you would love to have dinner or a drink with? Today, from throughout history, whoever you like.
I'm going to go for Thomas Cromwell.
Oh, yes.
Because I think he would obviously be a fascinating person to talk to, could give you a great insight into Tudor London.
Yeah.
And I'm a big Wolf Hall fan, so I think that would be great. You really get to the bottom of who Thomas Cromwell really was. So he'd be my first choice. My second choice would be, I mean, this is a really hard question, and there are so many names that I could pick, but I think I'm going to go for Christopher Wren as my second one.
Oh yeah, I think that would be interesting. Yeah.
I kind of thought about Pepys and Samuel Johnson. I feel like they're classic people that people would pick, but I almost feel like I feel like I know them quite well, if that makes sense. Like, because of the diaries and the biographies and that kind of thing, I almost feel like I could get more insight having dinner with someone that I don't know so much about. I feel like I'm thinking this through way too much, but
no, it's fine.
Yeah, Christopher Wren will be my second one, because I feel like he's the person that's had surely the most impact of one person on the city's lands. Maybe Hitler, I don't know. But who knows?
No, but you're right. I think you're absolutely right.
So he would be my second. And my third one, I'd pick Florence Nightingale. She's not, Actually, I don't even know whether Christopher Wren is a Londoner as such. Obviously, he lived in London, or spent a lot of time in London. And Florence Nightingale's not a Londoner, but she lived in London for a long time.
That counts. I mean, people say Shakespeare or Dickens or someone like that, and they've not been born in London, so, but they're considered Londoners in a way, so that's fine. But yeah, Florence Nightingale, that's also an interesting choice. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that would be it. I've actually weirdly got not a family link to Florence Nightingale, but my can't remember, it's like great grandmother or great aunt or something like that was her maid, her cook when she lived in London in Mayfair. She was her maid for 10 years, and we've got in the family, we've got a sort of handwritten note from Florence Nightingale to my long lost relative, which is quite interesting. So I feel like that's kind of why I picked Florence Nightingale, as well as the fact that obviously she's an incredibly interesting and sort of worthy person to have dinner with. Definitely,
but that's a really interesting story, and yeah, it's wonderful that you have this note for a relative.
I know. I actually only found that out quite recently. I knew we had this link, but yeah, I didn't know we actually had sort of a physical thing.
That's great. Yeah. Try not to lose it. Try to treasure it.
Yeah. Make sure it's sort of framed and put on display.
I'm collecting all the names that people give to me, and then one day I'm gonna publish a list with all the names that were given and who's on top. I mean, I think most people up to now, or most of my guests have said Shakespeare. So
I can't believe I didn't think of Shakespeare. I feel like maybe he would have made my list if I'd have thought of him.
maybe because it's too obvious. When I thought about it, I also thought I wouldn't have picked Shakespeare, but
I feel like there's people probably pick him obviously because of the plays, and people love Shakespeare, but also there's so many questions around Shakespeare that
right. You want to know what really you want to know the truth behind the man, maybe. Maybe one's disappointed to find out that maybe he really wrote everything he did, or maybe he didn't.
Yeah, that's true. There is the potential that you would be very, very disappointed.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So thank you very much, Jack. It was great to have you here on London and Talks Beyond Time and Place today. I'm going to put a link to Living London History into the description. And yes, as I said, thank you very much for being my guest, Jack.
No problem. Thanks for having me.